I take pleasure in sending. The United States has granted the Philippines their independence.
Swears in Vice President Sergio Osmeña as
If a
president.
prosperous and free democracy can be built in the Philippines,
The Republic of the Philippines.
ang akong kasing-kasing niawit.
The hard election drive pays off and Macapagal wins.
Placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
I have always been a firm advocate of peace.
We are today being hailed as the new Asian Tiger Cup.
Walang kaibigan, walang kumpare.
A strong republic is the bedrock.
Kayo ang boss ko.
Do not destroy my country because I will kill you.
Bakit kaya ngayon pa sumama ang panahon ng ganito? Kaya mo anak, darating na si Mariano at kayong kasama na ng Hilon.
For the first time, I think this is the first time in Philippine politics, in Philippine election history, that a movie was used to promote a candidacy. There was a movie that came out, Iginuhit ng Tadhana, which starred two of the biggest stars in Philippine cinema back then, Luis Gonzalez, he played the part of Marcos, and Gloria Romero, another big actress at that time, played the part of Imelda Marcos. So I think all this imaging and packaging helped Marcos win the elections and defeat Diosdado Macapagal.
Macapagal was a very good presidential story. The economy was already, working. He was very competent. But you need a better narrative, and that better narrative was Marcos.
I think the thing with Marcos is that from the very start, even when he was still a candidate, and up to his first years, he exuded that aura of youth and vigor, which was something that almost all the other presidents missed out on, except perhaps for the case of Magsaysay. And maybe Quezon. Si Quezon kasi, it was not youth. It was perhaps vigor, the sense of life. But for Marcos, it was a combination of both. And that's something that he had. I would suppose Macapagal did not. As well, si Marcos seemed to represent a new and younger Philippines, a new and younger government compared to the old traditional systems of before.
We have to remember that both of them, Macapagal and Marcos, belonged to the same party. They were both members of the Liberal Party. Macapagal was a president, and Marcos was Senate President. But because Macapagal wanted to run for a second term, Marcos had no choice but to seek candidacy under the Nacionalista Party. So again, we have another situation where two people, somebody from one party has to move to another party so that he can run for president. So we've seen all this moving from nationalista to liberal, from liberal to nationalista, all throughout, even during the habit, the practice goes as far back as during the time of Quezon and Osmeña. What stands out is that whole packaging of candidate Marcos. Here was this Ilocano. He was not mestizo, which I think is maybe a disadvantage back then. He was not particularly good looking, but he was Marcos, lean, very fit. He was not particularly tall. He was Ilocano, which means to say that he did not exactly have a pedigree of the usual landed elite, but he was married to this tall, beautiful mestiza from Leyte, who belonged to a prominent clan from the south, Imelda Romualdez. So the two of them, they were able to present themselves as something akin to the JFK and Jacqueline Kennedy of the United States.
Because remember that when Marcos ran, it was also the time of John F. Kennedy. And Kennedy won because he had war medals in many ways. He was a young man, John F. Kennedy. He was a bemedaled war hero. He had beautiful wife and wonderful little children. And that's basically the package that Ferdinand Marcos gave to the country in the 1965 elections, was an exact image of the Kennedys.
The basic biography of Marcos was that he was from Ilocos Norte. He was from Sarat. His mother was a teacher, and his father, of course, was a government official. I think probably because of his role as a president and part of his active role that he had in creating his life story, medyo daming lahat takpal na story. For example, it has been known that his father, Mariano Marcos, was killed by the guerrillas for collaboration with the Japanese when he was young. That was, of course, not mentioned a lot, but it was mentioned that his father died during the war. He was a student at the University of the Philippines. So I think Marcos was the person that was tailor-made to become a politician at that time.
Marcos was born in Sarat, but he was raised up in Batak, Ilocos Norte. And of course, when we say Ilocos Norte, he was actually, some would say frugal. And that actually reflected on his fashion. They said that he invented the barong that was short. Because, when you sit down and your barong is long, lukot-lukot na siya after the end of the day. So you have to change your barong every time. And he doesn't want to do that. So he wants to wear one barong a day.
He was a brilliant student. That of course, was undeniable. He would eventually study law in the University of the Philippines. And I think what almost destroyed his career was when he got involved in the killing of his father's political opponent when he ran for Congress.
Now, what happened was, at that time, Mariano Marcos was already prominent in the area. And so he ran for congressman. Mariano Marcos ran against a guy named Julio Nalundasan. And in the 1935 elections, Gregorio Aglipay, the one who supposedly were friends with the Marcoses and gave Marcos his anting-anting, Aglipay was running for president against Emilio Aguinaldo and Manuel Quezon. And then, on the announcement of the winners, Mariano Marcos was defeated as congressman to Julio Nalundasan. And the story goes that Julio Nalundasan and his supporters paraded around Batak. They paraded, and they paraded two coffins. One represented Aglipay, the other one represented Mariano Marcos, saying that they're both politically dead. At dumaan yun sa bahay nila. Well, at that time, Ferdinand Marcos was a law student. He was part of the UP Vanguard. He was part of the ROTC. They said that he kind of felt sorry for that. And so, that night, kasi may batalan dyan, di ba? Then you have a window, sisipilyo si Julio Nalundasan, bumulagta, pinaril, patay. So, the newly elected congressman was dead. Who would be the suspect? Of course, the suspect would be the Marcoses. And what happened was, they built a case against Ferdinand that they said that there was one gun at the UP Armory that was lost. And so they said that he used it. And you know what happened? He was actually convicted.
What was, I think, established the Marcos legend at first was that he was already a lawyer. In fact, he topped the bar while studying in prison because he continued his studies while he was in prison.
And so they cannot believe it. What did they do? They have to repeat. He have to repeat the exam, oral, and he topped it again. So he said he was really number one, okay. And he went to the Supreme Court, presented his case. He did not get any lawyer. He lawyered for himself. It was a very famous case.
Another interesting thing was that the Supreme Court justice who would write the Marcos acquittal, who would write the decision for the Marcos acquittal, was Justice Jose P. Laurel, the former president of the Second Republic, because he felt that there was a brilliant lawyer who would eventually destroy his entire career just because of a sentence that was not, according to him, definitely proven. So eventually he would grant the acquittal of Marcos. I think this was also the reason why that then Senator and later Vice President Salvador P. Laurel, the son of Jose P. Laurel, was never touched by the Marcoses, even though he was in the opposition. The new society was actually a concept of Marcos even before. No?
From the point of view of Marcos, 1972 was all about bagong lipunan, the new society.
He wanted to do more because he wanted to win the presidency.
Ferdinand Marcos ng Batak, Lalawigan ng Ilocos Norte, inihalal at itinanghal ng Pangulo ng Pilipinas. May bagong silang, may bago ng buhay, bagong bansa,
Ferdinand Marcos was actually, in a way, lucky because he assumed the presidency after Macapagal. And, Macapagal's issue was corruption. But, he left the Philippines in a very good shape. And, during the time of Macapagal, we did not have as much foreign loans. So, what happened was, Marcos had some money to spend in infra. He learned from Macapagal, actually, because Macapagal also had infrastructure projects.
If you only look at, for example, the second half of his term, you would see how the ideas germinated in something completely different from what the other presidents had. Yung new society niya, yung Green Revolution, a revolution from within, those are things that nobody ever thought of before. And those are things that captured the imagination. Those were things that drew people, that made them want to be a part of something. I would think yun ang meron niya na wala yung iba talaga eh. He had a sense of vision, he had a sense of purpose, and he was able to transfer that purpose to people around him. Masagana 99, the new society, bagong lipunan, you'd sing along to that.
The new society was actually a concept of Marcos even before. From what I understand, the changing of the government to improve the country was already being conceptualized by him in his college law thesis. The shift of a government would eventually benefit the nation. He had already the germ of this idea. But remember, the entire concept of the new society came in 1972 after the approval of the Philippine Constitution. But the concept was of long-range planning that he himself had put into place.
I think the deal or the bargain that Marcos offered the nation was that peace and prosperity at the expense of individual or civil rights, because it was a dictatorship. Part of the plan was like, okay, there will be a dictatorship, there will be an authoritarian government, a one-man rule, but this autocrat, this dictator, had to deliver promises of quiet society, and with that, he had to show accomplishments. And The accomplishments normally had to come in the form of infrastructure, buildings, hospitals. That's why during the period of Bagong Lipunan, that's when we saw a lot of infrastructure projects come up. These infrastructure projects were usually the kind that would supposedly showcase the positive side of martial law and the new society. We're talking about the San Juanico Bridge, which is the longest bridge back then, connecting Samar and Leyte. Imelda was at the forefront of building all these hospitals. Philippine Heart Center for Asia, that's how she called it back then, the National Kidney Institute. She helped using private funds. She helped again in reviving the Philippine General Hospital. We even had a children's hospital in Quezon City too. It was all these things that she built.
During the first years of Marcos, he was actually able to build thousands of classrooms. But he wanted to do more because he wanted to win the presidency. He wanted to be the first president after Manuel Quezon to win the second term. Marrying, for him, was also a political decision. And of course, this was not exclusive to him. This happened to a lot of our presidents. And he was a young congressman when, in the cafeteria of Congress, he saw a very beautiful lady, very tall. And then he found out that that was the niece of the Speaker of the House. She was actually a simple lady at the time. In fact, what the story was that her slippers did not even match at that time. She was wearing simple clothes, but she was very beautiful. And you know what Marcos did? The first time that he approached her, the girl, he made her stand. Why? He was measuring her because she was too tall, and you know, would this be okay? If we're going out together, we'll be seen in public. This is probably what he was thinking at that time. He measured her height. And of course, that beautiful girl was Imelda Marcos. Imelda Romualdez. Kinulit niya si Imelda. She went to Baguio, sinundan niya, 11 days, na-convince niya. Actually, she doesn't like him at first. But she saw that he desperately wanted her, and so she agreed. She was a central bank employee at the time. She was the candidate for Miss Manila, 1953. That's when Miss Universe, Amy Cosela, actually crowned the winner. They both lost, of course, but that in a way cemented Imelda's stature as a beauty queen.
Imelda would describe their partnership this way. Marcos was the father of the nation. She was the mother who was there to make sure the house was in order, that the house was beautiful. In fact, one of the major projects of Imelda, even before martial law or 72 or the new society, was she wanted to build a home for Filipino culture and the arts, which is the CCP. I think the big misconception is that the CCP, which was very controversial back then, controversial because the opposition tried to use it to demolish the Marcoses. But we need to remember that the CCP was built not using government money. It was built using funds raised by Imelda herself from friends. Maybe she had to do a little arm twisting or whatever, but the fact is it wasn't built using government funds. It was a private foundation that built the CCP.
Nakita mo naman yung mga proyekto ni Luis Marcos. Cultural Center, Lung Center, Heart Center, Kidney Center. Ang daing niyang naitulong sa bayan natin. Tsaka yung tungkol sa Tripoli Agreement, siya nag-finalize na siya mismo ang pumunta sa Tripoli.
He had the birth of the Moro National Liberation Front. Clearly, yung first quarter storm, he tried to stamp it out.
It's hard not to think that Marcos declared martial law simply to stay in power. But it's also probably not smart to just limit his motives to that.
My countrymen, as of the 21st of this month, I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law.
But we must also consider what was happening at that time. Because when Marcos became already president, it was the start of the Muslim rebellions. Pabagsak lalo yung communist eh. But in the 1960s, medyo nagsisimula na itong lumabas ulit. And by the early 70s, it was already becoming a what was considered at that time the seeds of a continuous rebellion by the communist leadership. And Marcos already saw the need of expanding the military, not only for the local or the national security, but also for the international security because of the ongoing battles, of course, with the still the Cold War. Of course, the security of a nation was always his problem, and of course, the solution for it, palakihin yung military. It was good. But of course, there was also the sense that he was courting the military dahil he was going to place himself in power.
We had the birth of the More National Liberation Front. Clearly, yung first quarter storm, he tried to stamp it out, eh? And that much was clear. They tried to stamp out the first quarter storm, they tried to stamp out the Diliman Commune, they suspended the writ of habeas corpus. So there was a series of events leading up to the declaration of martial law. And clearly, there was parang some sort of experimentation along the way, trying to see how far he could push the envelope until September 21, 1972. Martial law was not the first attempt by Ferdinand Marcos to curtail rights. The suspension of the writ of habeas corpus was the first one.
His term was supposed to end in 1972. That's why the narrative we see in most history books is that because he was not allowed to seek a third term, that was the reason why he declared martial law, so he can stay in power. Because if we would have followed the Constitution, he should have stepped down in 1972 at the end of his second term. Where was the communist in all this time? Okay. When he declared martial law in 72, the reason that he gave was that he wanted to save the republic from, number one, from the threat of communists. And number two, he wanted to break the power of the oligarchs. But after 1970, it was waning. It was subsiding. More or less, it was kind of quiet. And then all of a sudden, he declares martial law in 72, ostensibly to save the republic from the communists. The communist movement was still weak at that point in 72. They had just broken away from the old Partido Comunista ng Pilipinas. There was a new party, a younger communist party under Jose Maria Sison, who was a university professor, a student activist from UP. So they were still in the process of trying to build their ranks and grow the army, the New People's Army. But there was not a lot of them. So it's very debatable whether the communists really pose a threat to the republic in 1972 when Marcos declared martial law.
You know, in many ways, I believe that if Marcos declared martial law during the first quarter storm, he would have been justified because those were really violent protests. But he was actually thinking already, according to his diaries of January 28, that I can declare martial law because I think that there are forces that wanted me out and, I should stop them. But you know what he said in that diary entry? He said, I'm not going to declare martial law now, even if that means that I can nip it at the bud, because it would not be accepted by the people. And so what did he write? He wrote in the next pages, he said, he have to wait for more massive terrorism, assassination plot, basically for the situation to develop, to become worse. Why? He will then declare martial law.
Bakit nang deklara ng martial law? Grabe ang kaguluhan. Gusto ng mga komunista mag-take over. Kaya nga sabi ko, the best thing that ever happened to our country was when Marcos declared martial law. Kaya meron tayong demokrasya. Hindi tayo naging komunista.
I think also that the reason he tried to break the oligarchy, we call him the oligarchy, was that the oligarchy was much in control of a lot of the utilities, the enterprises, and everything that he felt was contrary to the welfare of the poor. He wasn't going to court the rich in order to establish himself in power. He had to court the middle class and the poor, who were the ordinary citizens, who, remember, are the electorate.
One of the first things he did after declaring martial law in 1972 was he democratized power to the grassroots. Meaning to say, he started the barangay government. That happened during Marcos. The barangay government. Officially, he issued a presidential decree saying that all barrios should be converted to barangays and the barangay leaders should be elected by the people. That move, in a way, is democratizing power, bringing power down to the grassroots.
You know, at the outset, when he declared martial law and started arresting people, it almost seemed like that was the objective. Almost. I say almost because in the months and years to follow, it was clear that he was creating his own set of oligarchs. Yeah, you arrest all these businessmen, you arrest all these people with their political clans and their haciendas, and you put them in jail, and then you put your own people in their place. And you create your own army of cronies. Yes, he fought against oligarchs, but no, he made his own. And they're now famously called cronies.
By definition, oligarchs are the rich families who control government. What Marcos wanted was businessmen who will follow him on what to do in the economy. There's a difference between oligarchs and what we know now as cronies.
You should give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. You should credit Marcos for the good things that he did. But you have to re-examine the other side of his legacy, which is, you know, the people doubted our justice system. The other legacy, of course, is impunity. Because, you know, they did not pay for their crimes as much as they should have because they got away. They were able to escape. Despite the fact that our government pursued these cases, they kept on losing documents, and by technicality, they get, you know, acquitted with these cases.
Ako siguro, one of the greatest legacies of Ferdinand Marcos would be the infrastructure that he built. I mean, I think that we have to give to him. But then again, he was there from 65 to 86. That's 21 years. So that was quite long. But in those years, he was able to build a lot of infrastructure. Buildings, highways, bridges. That is clearly his legacy. Whether he made money out of building those infrastructure projects would be another story altogether. But they were built, and that much is clear.